Introduce our next presenter. So it's Aino, and she is going to talk about the retrospective anti-patterns. I kindly invite you to present yourself, just devoted several minutes for it, for our audience. And the QA session depends on you. So please, if any questions, raise your hand and we will just provide them. Aino will answer. And also at the end of the session, we will ask you to ask questions or write in Hua. After this session, also, you will be asked to provide your feedback, and the numbers are given over there on our wall. So let's start. Aino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have? Do I have 45 minutes from now or less?
No, you have 20 minutes, so let's start. 20 minutes. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I'm sad that I couldn't be here. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to fly at the moment, but I hope that I'll be there next year. Yeah, so my name is Aino Corry. I'm from Denmark. I have been facilitating retrospectives for a number of years now, and I really like facilitating retrospectives. And during that time, I've done a lot of mistakes. And that's why I've written a book about all the mistakes that I've made and how to get out of the mistakes. So that's called the Retrospectives Antipatterns. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I want to make you aware of the antipatterns so that you get better retrospectives than I have. So the aim with this talk is that when you say to people that it's retrospective time, that they look like that. So that they're dancing and singing, they want to go to the retrospective. I know it looks like they might be afraid and running away, but I want them to look happy. That was the aim. And in order to get people to become very happy about your retrospectives, I want to tell you about what antipatterns is and what I think retrospectives are before we get started. So first, I want to take you to hell. So this is hell. As you know it, it's a very warm place. It's eternal fire. It's eternal pain. It's a terrible place to be. You all know that, but perhaps you don't know this. This is Niflheim. This is the Viking hell. This is where you go if you haven't killed in the right way as a Viking. You go to a place where it's cold and damp and there is eternal rain, and it's just very, very sad. Looks a bit like my back garden in the fall. And why do I talk about these two different types of hell? It's because I want to give you a point about the difference between patterns and anti-patterns. So some of you might know patterns already. It's an abstract solution to an often recurring problem. So if you have somewhere where you have some experience, you can write your experience down as a pattern. And the important thing about pattern is that it has a name so that you can communicate about it. You can say, oh, I implemented a visitor or I needed an observer there. It has a problem domain. This is the situation you're in when you apply the pattern. It has the abstract pattern solution, and the pattern solution has benefits and consequences. Then we have the anti-patterns, which also has a name, also has a problem domain, also have a solution. But the difference is that the solution that you will see being used many times is actually a bad solution or an anti-pattern solution. So that means that the negative consequences are higher than the positive benefits that you get out of it. And then you want to have a refactored solution. So you want to solve the problem so that you get more benefits than consequences. And this is where the two hells come in, because when people didn't behave well, hell was invented as a pattern solution to make them behave well so that they did not want to go to hell, so they didn't kill people, they were nice people. But unfortunately, when we tried to introduce this to the Vikings just thought, oh, great, it's very warm in hell. It's nice, we'll go there, we'll go to the beach, we'll have drinks. So that's why the pattern solution, some places in the world, became an anti-pattern solution in the cold areas of the world. And in those cases, then you need a refactored solution. And the refactored solution is then Niflheim, which is a place that they don't want to go to. So we changed the solution that was good somewhere but bad somewhere else into a good solution here. It's a bit like the microservices pattern, which in some organizations can be a pattern, But in other organizations, the microservices pattern can become an anti-pattern because they can't implement it in the right way. When I talk about retrospectives, I say that there are three very important things about a retrospective. It's important that we share our experiences with each other. We have been working together. We have this meeting together to learn together. And the first and foremost thing is that we share what we have experienced, whether it made us sad or mad or glad, whether we got energy out of it. And then the next point that's important is to appreciate, but both appreciating the positive things that I see you did something good there, or I saw that this made you happy or this gave you energy, but also appreciating things that are difficult for people. So seeing that there are some things that didn't work so well, but I understand that you had this experience. And then the last thing, which is the thing that you do to actually sell retrospectives to management, is that you learn from this. So you share, you appreciate, and you learn. And in my world, it's not just small IT teams that should have retrospectives. It's everybody that should have retrospectives. It's families that should have retrospectives after vacations. It's big organizations that should have retrospectives together. It sounds a bit like post-mortems, but post-mortems is something that's done when something has failed or something is over, to look at and dissect what was actually the problem, much like a post-mortem with human bodies. And the retrospective is more looking forward and more recurring. You're doing it again and again while you are working and while you are learning. So that's what antipatterns and retrospectives are for me. So in Dana Larsen and Esther Darby's book, the Agile Retrospectives, which I will recommend very highly here, they talk about the 5 stages of a retrospective and why the 5 stages of a retrospective are important. And I'm going to go through them while I talk about the anti-patterns that sometimes can occur. So the first part of a retrospective is setting the stage, where you're getting ready. Here you're looking back at the action points you decided at the last retrospective, and you see whether you implemented them or not, and why you didn't, and if you get the benefits that you wanted. It's also important that everybody gets to say something here at the beginning of a retrospective, because then it's easier for people to say something again later. So having some sort of round with the one question to everybody can be very beneficial. And those questions can be fun, they can be serious, they can be about the process, they can be about anything. So it could be everything from what did you take too seriously last week, or what was your favorite work task last week, to how would you describe the last sprint as a weather forecast, or how would you describe your team as a car. And in some cases, it's good to have the serious questions because people don't want to waste time. In other cases, it can be good to have the more foolish questions because it makes people laugh, and laughing together is very important. But also, if you talk about the last sprint as a weather forecast, it's sometimes easier because you distance yourself a little bit to say that it was bad. So instead of saying it was bad, you can say there was a thunder weather or something like that. So setting the stage is quite important. The next one is gather data, where you collect the data. This is the easiest part of retrospectives. This is the thing where you get most help, and you see a lot of people gathering data with post-it notes, or mad, sad, glad posters, or a ship retrospectives, or a team radar to gather data. And that's all very well, but don't forget that data can be anything. It can also be a burn down chart. It can also be feedback from your customers. It can be regression test results. It can be all sorts of data. It doesn't have to be post-it notes about how you feel. Sometimes I facilitate retrospectives for DevOps teams, and they're very much focused on solving all the technical problems and not these people problems. So in those cases, we definitely bring a lot of real hard data and the gather data. But as we progress into the retrospective, it's interesting how many of these problems actually turn out to be problems about communication, problems about process, problems about organization, even if we start with the hard facts. So gather data is an easy part, an important part of a retrospective, but actually also one of the parts of a retrospective where you can land into the first anti-pattern I want to talk about. And the first anti-pattern is called Wheel of Fortune. And you should imagine here that you're in a Tivoli where somebody is sort of rolling that Wheel of Fortune, and the little needle says tick, tick, tick. And sometimes you're lucky, and you land somewhere where you get a prize, but other times you're not lucky and you land somewhere where you just lose your money. So that's what I want you to think about while I go into this anti-pattern. So one of the ways that people gather data is to put up different posters like start, stop, continue. And then people put up different post-it notes. Perhaps they say we should start doing more pair programming, we should have less meetings, or we should stop ignoring the pull requests. And there's nothing wrong in gathering data in this way. It's the next part that can be difficult, because some people are saying, okay, this is great. We're optimizing this retrospective. We can do this retrospective in only 30 minutes. We're so efficient with retrospectives. Now that we have this, we'll just say that we'll have pair programming 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. And then we solve this and we have a good action point. Also with the less meetings, that's great. We're just going to erase half of our meetings. So that will be fine. And stop ignoring the pull requests. Oh, that's easy. I know somebody who has a bot we can install in our Slack channel, and then people will be reminded. So they'll never ignore the pull requests again. And this could be...
Aino, sorry for interrupting you. Can you show the whole screen, entire screen? Because at this moment we can see everything. So maybe you can change the... Yep.
Oh, so you are seeing...
Yep, just a minute.
What now? Is it still
Perfect.
the same?
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for interrupting me.
Thanks.
Great. Oh, well, in the other case that you could see all my notes, that's also very practical. This is probably better. Right, so if the problem with the lack of pair programming really was that people just forget to do it, then scheduling, making a hard schedule for pair programming is a very good solution to this problem. But what if the lack of pair programming is just a symptom and not the actual problem? What if it's a symptom of lack of psychological safety? What if it's a symptom that people are afraid of having somebody else sitting next to them when they work? What if it's a symptom that they don't know how to do it remotely? Then scheduling more pair programming will not solve the actual problem. It will actually make the problem worse. And the same with less meetings. What if the problem is not the quantity of the meetings, but the quality of the meetings? And having less meetings actually only gives us less bad meetings instead of better meetings. So that doesn't solve the actual problem. And exactly the same with ignoring the pull requests. There could be all sorts of reasons for ignoring them, not just that you're forgetting them. So you can see that sometimes when you set out to solve the problems that you see in retrospectives, if you're just taking them as they are right after you've gathered data, then sometimes you're solving the symptoms and not the actual problems. And then the problems are still there and they will continue to reappear in the retrospectives and reappear in the daily life. So what you have to do to solve this, to get out of this anti-pattern, is to remember the 5 stages that Diana Larsen and Esther David talked about. That you, after you've gathered data, that you need to generate insight. And with generating insight, I mean that instead of just taking all these post-it notes for face value, you actually dive into a discussion about them. And it could be just that you talk about them one-on-one, or it could be that you're making a 5-why interview, or even you can also make an Ishikawa diagram or a fishbone diagram. And a fishbone diagram is just a diagram for cause analysis, where you say the problem is here, and then you let people think about what could the different causes be for this problem. And in that case, you get a more broad cause analysis. But this cause analysis, of course, takes time. So you can't do that for every post-it note in the retrospective every time, but you might do it for one that keeps popping up, or you might do it for one in the next retrospective. You can even have a whole retrospective just based around this fishbone diagram, trying to find causes to the problem and solving the causes instead of the symptoms. And then there are many ways you can do this. You can either just give them a fishbone without the labels on, or you can give them a fishbone with the labels, or you can give them a fishbone with some labels and some labels not being there. It really depends on the kind of people you're working with, whether they need the labels or not. You can try it out in different ways. So that was the Wheel of Fortune. Now, the retrospective anti-pattern here is that you jump directly from gathered data to deciding what to do. And what you want is to slow this down to generate insights. And when you have generated insights, when you know what it is actually that caused these things, then you can move on in your retrospective stages. You can move on to decide what to do, in which you will perhaps brainstorm for action points, or perhaps action point proposals came out of all your discussions and generate insights, and then you can vote for which ones to have. And then in the end, you can close the retrospective where you make sure that the action points are smart goals, that they're specific and they're measurable, and you actually have somebody who's responsible for doing them. And it is this team that can do something about it. Now, a retrospective consisting of these 5 stages resembles any meeting, really, because any meeting has a life cycle. In a meeting, you start with a topic where hopefully you're in agreement about what this meeting is about. And when you start the meeting, you sort of open the floor, you go into divergence. And you say that, well, my experience is this, and I know about this, and you sort of you talk about different things. You say that this is the boundary of what different things we can talk about in this meeting. And then you have a groan zone where you discuss different things. You're not coming to any conclusions yet, but you're also not opening the floor more. And then you go into the convergence where you cut off some of the decision branches or communication branches. And then in the end, you decide whether you want another meeting to follow up on this, or whether you actually have made a decision. So this is what any meeting that's healthy should look like. And the important thing about having something like this is that you know where you are in the meeting, so that some people are not trying to open the floor even more, while other people are trying to converge and come to an agreement. And it's important that people know where they are in the meeting, and it's important that people know where they are in the retrospective. Some teams will find it difficult to open the floor, to come up with post-it notes. They might need a specific activity to do that. Other teams find it difficult to stay in the groan zone. They want to move on to decide what to do. That's what I mostly see with the software developers, that they are trained so much to solve problems almost automatically, that spending time in generating insights in the groan zone is difficult for them, because they just want to make decisions. But if you can keep them in that groan zone a little bit more, maybe you'll get more discussions, you'll get more causes out instead of just the symptoms, but it can be very difficult. Now, the next anti-pattern I want to talk about is called in the soup. And you can see the picture here of the octopus. It's trying to lift a weight that is too heavy for it. I'm imagining the octopus to be like a team trying to solve something that they cannot solve, because, you know, octopi has the feature that they have 60% of their brain in the tentacles and then the rest in the head. So they are like 9 small animals working together, most like a little team. Now, what sometimes happens in retrospectives, both when we are discussing the problems, but also when we're deciding what to do, is that, again, we're not discussing in the same way at the same time. So before I talked about how some people are talking about problems, generating insights, and some people are making decisions at the same time. But here we have different types of problems. Sometimes I have a team where when we gather data and we look at the post-it notes, we can see that a lot of the post-it notes are actually about things that the team can't do anything about. And in that case, what we're doing is that we're just complaining about things, right? We're not really getting anywhere. It's just a complaint session. So if you notice that in a team that they're not really taking responsibility for their problems, you should throw in this soup activity. So this soup activity is the refactored solution to being in the soup, where you discuss things in the soup. So I sometimes throw it in during gathered data, where I say, well, let's take all the things that you're complaining about and throw it into the soup diagram. And then what we could do is that we could say, well, let's just discuss the things that are in the do circle, because those are the only things that we actually have possibilities of changing. So we shouldn't waste time discussing things in the soup right now, because that's not something we can change. But the interesting thing is that when we start talking about these things, maybe we find some things that we can actually do something about, both with the things in the soup and in the things that we can influence. Now, I do it here after I've gathered data, just looking at the data, but it's also sometimes a good idea to do it in the decide what to do, because if you in the decide what to do have a lot of proposals for things that other people should do, and then you just decide these things should be your action points for next retrospective, you're not really setting your setup for success. You might just get frustrated because you're not in power to change these things. So if people come up with action points like change the location of the company, or let's make not so useless meetings, then perhaps you need to have a discussion, and either you should say, let's only vote for the things that we can actually do, like code review all major changes, or maybe try to come up with sub-actions that we can actually do. Perhaps change the meeting culture is something we can do, or come up with reasons for a local hub. So when you find yourself in the soup in a retrospective, and you might not notice immediately, maybe it's something that you notice after maybe 3 retrospectives with this team, that you see that they're always discussing the same thing that they really cannot change, and they're just complaining. This is a time where you say to them, either you get the energy to change the things that you can change, or you accept the things that you cannot change, and then either stop complaining or move to another organization. Find some way to adapt to these things that you can't change, because complaining about it just takes away the energy for the whole team. So that was the second retrospective anti-pattern. The third that I want to talk about is called Prime Directive Ignorance. Now, the first book written about retrospectives is this one, Project Retrospectives by Norm Kurth. He was the first person to call it retrospectives and not postmortems, and to look at them as something that you learn from. And one of the things that he wrote was called the Prime Directive. And I'm just going to let you read that. Now, the Prime Directive is a good way of thinking about a retrospective. It is a mindset that you should strive to have when you enter a retrospective. Norm Kurth said that, of course, I know it can be difficult to truly believe that everybody did the best they could. But if we could just try to have that mindset when we enter a retrospective, we are much more likely to actually get some interesting discussions at the retrospective. Because if we're not trying to find a scapegoat in the moment we go in, or we already decided that it's Peter's fault, if we can get away from those thoughts, we can be much more open and tolerant to try to understand and learn what actually happened, so that we can improve together instead of just telling somebody off. And that leads me to something else that I think is a big part of a retrospective. I already talked about the share, appreciate, and learn, but something else is important. To truly understand everything is to forgive everything. It's something that my father used to say to me, and in the beginning I didn't quite understand what he meant, but the older I get, the more I understand that if you really try to appreciate and understand and learn from other people's experiences, then you might be able to forgive something that you thought was a bad thing to do, but actually it's understandable that they did that. So it can be difficult to have that mindset, but try to have it, and try to either write it in the email invitation or put it on a poster in the retrospective. Prime Directive Ignorance is one of the anti-patterns that I see most often. And now due to not so much time, I've skipped some anti-patterns, so this will be the last one I talk about, and then we'll get the rest in the question section. So disregard for preparation is an anti-pattern that I saw in online retrospectives. That was actually before COVID, where I started doing more and more online retrospectives. But of course, it's just become more and more relevant over the past years. And it's called disregard for preparation, because what I saw often when people were to facilitate an online retrospective was that they did not understand how much preparation there actually goes into an online preparation, in online retrospective. It is more than an on-site retrospective. In an on-site retrospective, you can sort of wing it a bit easier. You can read people's body language easier. You can divide them into smaller teams, let them talk 2 and 2 and 3 and 3. You can decide who they talk to, either by counting or by saying, talk to the ones next to you. You can change the board pretty easily. It's harder when it's an online retrospective, so you do have to prepare more. So what I normally say is that you should try to send an email the day before the retrospective with a link to the document that you are using. So I have on my website some templates in Google Drawings that when I have to facilitate an online retrospective, I can just go there and copy it, and then I can use that. I don't have to prepare a whole thing. Also Mural, in my Mural setup, I have a lot of templates that I made myself, and Mural has some templates, Miro has templates. There's a lot of online tools out there. I also like to use Nitro. Nitro is an online retrospective facilitation tool where you sign up as the facilitator and invite the team, and then the Nitro system just takes you through all the different steps. But send an email the day before so that you force people to see if they can actually log in, if they have the right link, so you don't have to spend the first minutes on that. And then send an email 15 minutes before. Say that, oh, we're going to see each other for the retrospective in 15 minutes, go get a coffee or a bio break. Because otherwise what happens is that some people show up at time, and then they see other people not showing up at time. And then they say, oh, if he's not there, I can just get a cup of coffee, okay? And then you say, okay, yes. And they go get a cup of coffee. And while they're gone, somebody else pops up and say, oh, great, I have time for getting a coffee then. And then your retrospective starts maybe 5 to 7 minutes late. And if you only set aside maybe 75 or 90 minutes for the retrospective, it's actually quite a big percentage of the time that you lost there. And you don't have to send the email 15 minutes before. You can probably just, whenever you set up a retrospective, you can set up an automatic email or an automatic announcement to the people who signed up for the meeting. And insist on video for all. This is a bit problematic to say that, because I know that some people don't like being on video or have a bad internet connection or whatever is happening in the background that they don't want to share. So I understand that not everybody wants to be on video, but it's the same as the Wheel of Fortune. Try to figure out what is causing this. So the symptom is they're not on video. What's the cause? If they do have a real problem, by all means, don't be on video, but try to tell people that as a facilitator, it's really important for you to see people on video, both because then you can read their body language. You can see whether they're angry about something, whether they want to say something, whether they've fallen asleep or something like that. It's so difficult when you're online to read the body language, and you have so little body language already just with this frame. And if you just have a blank screen, it's even worse to figure out if people are still there or if they want to say something. So it's your tool. Your tool is their body language. So if they don't want to be on video, you can try some small games in the beginning, like show something red in your office or something like that, so that they have like an excuse to turn on the camera, and then it might be easier to keep the camera on. If they still insist on not being on video, you can talk to them one-on-one and say, well, it would really mean something to me if you were on video. Could you do that? And then perhaps they say, well, I can't really because I'm taking this call from a car. And there's a problem already, right? Because you don't take a retrospective from a car. You might take a meeting from a car where you just have to talk or listen. But in a retrospective where you are sharing something together, you're looking at the things other people have written and you're writing things, you can't do that from a car. But also it could be that people are thinking, well, the retrospective is a waste of time. I can just work on something while I'm at the retrospective. So that's why I'm not on video. And that, of course, is not good, because what you really want is retrospectives that people get something out of as a team. It can be a bit like team building, and it's definitely important to share and appreciate each other's situation so that you can learn from it. And if you see that people are not interested in the retrospective, you might have to change your retrospectives. Maybe you should ask them what they think that we need to have in the retrospective. Maybe you should stress that the action points are actually getting done so that they're not just lying somewhere on a post-it notes, but they're part of the Asia DevOps board or the Jira board or whatever you're doing, so that they are together with the other things so that you don't forget them. Because if you forget to do the things that you decide in the retrospective, it can become a waste of time. And there are a lot of people out there who are saying, I can show you how to make fun retrospectives. And it's great with fun retrospectives, but that's only the second stage. The first thing is that they need to be constructive and they need to feel that it's not a waste of time. So you can go from not seeing people on video to trying to figuring out that the course is actually that you need to change the way that you do retrospectives. It's interesting to have these discussions. The next point, make sure everyone is equal, is quite important, and it's becoming more and more important now when people are coming back from COVID. It means that sometimes you have these hybrid meetings where some people are together in the room and other people are online, and that might work for some meetings. But again, I would stress that for a retrospective, it's so important that everybody is equal, so that they feel on an equal footing, equal setting, equally psychological safety, so that they can talk together. Otherwise, the people who are in the room together, they will talk together. They will have small talk. They will talk just with body language and small facial expressions. And the people who are outside remotely, they don't get to be part of that discussion. And that means that the communication is on a too high level. We need to have the communication on the lowest level so that everybody can be there. So when I'm invited to facilitate a hybrid retrospective, I ask everybody to be remote. Even though some people say that's a waste of this wonderful video connection room that we have where 5 of us could sit. I said, yes, I understand, but we should have people sitting individually. If some people are individual, everybody should be individual. There is one exception, is that if we have only one person who is remote and for some reason is not able to be in the office, then you can use an avatar. You can have one of the people in the room to be that person's avatar, to write on post-it notes what they would write, to say what they should say. And then don't record it. Don't record retrospectives. It just doesn't induce any kind of trust or psychological safety, which is what you really need in a retrospective. So that was the last of the 4 patterns that I had time to go through today. Disregard for preparation. Remember, you have preparation for an online retrospective more than otherwise. And I hope that with this, your retrospectives will be pleasant and constructive. And I'll just summarize: solve the problems, not the symptoms. Make sure you're on the same page, that you're talking about the same thing at the same time in the meeting. Allow time for small talk and preparation before you start the meeting. Especially if it's an online meeting, it can sometimes be helpful to actually be there yourself 5 minutes before, and to make that a standard that people can show up before if they want to. And then focus on what you can do instead of trying to make other people change things. So focus on what the team can do. Deal with the things that you cannot change. Don't just forget about them. Figure out whether you want to accept it, whether you want to adapt to it, or whether you can't live with it. And then make it safe for people to speak up. Try to find a way to create psychological safety around these people. Trust is built by reliability and relation. So the more people can rely on each other, which can be by work rules or process, and the more relation they have to each other. This could be like the funny questions you ask at the start of a retrospective, or social meetings that you have together. When people get to know each other a little bit more like human beings, they trust each other more, they can ask for help, and they can say if they're stuck. And I think now with the 3 minutes for questions, I just want to say that I wanted to bring books to Vilnius, but I couldn't. It's out there in English, German, Chinese, and I also narrated an audiobook myself. So it has a very weird Danish accent. So that was it. And I think there's a few minutes for questions if there are any.
Ivo. Thanks, Ivo, for your presentation. I hope that everyone got some tricks and tips what to do during your retrospectives. And at this moment, we have some minutes left for our questions and answers. Do we have any questions from the audience? Do we? The most active participant will get some our gift from my partner.
So, do we have one? If not, I am going to Google, and here we have two more questions. So the first one, how to, I know it's for you, yeah? How to improve retrospective with the same team after years? Do you have tips for us?
Yeah, so if you have the same team and year after year, you facilitate the retrospective, there are different ways of changing it up. Now, some teams love it to be the same way all the time, but sometimes it can be good to do something else. Sometimes it can be good to have like a positivity retrospective where you can only talk about positive things, or maybe you can ask them if they have any particular movie or any particular hobby, and then you can make the retrospective around that. You can make the retrospective as a future perspective, so that you can say, what do you think will, if we imagine we're 3 months in the future, what has happened in those 3 months? So you're looking back at something that will happen. So a future perspective can be good. But I think in general, it might be a good idea to change the facilitator from time to time. That if you are facilitating for your own team, the problem is that you are either a good facilitator where you're looking at body language and agenda and discussions, and then you can't be part of the discussions yourself. You don't get anything out of the retrospective yourself. But if you want to go into the discussions and get something out of the retrospective because it's your team, your retrospective, then you forget to be a facilitator. So you're sort of wearing two hats and you're not wearing both of them good all the time. So sometimes I say, well, try to find somebody else in the team who wants to facilitate these retrospectives. So maybe find somebody else in the organization who wants to facilitate retrospectives, and then rotate that facilitation between the teams in the organization.
We have more questions from the audience.
Thank you for your time. A question I have with the online retrospectives, what's something I've been starting to observe, that sometimes maybe one or two participants don't even participate, especially like in writings. So you don't even notice that it's an online thing. But when you know the team, you notice. How do you ensure that everyone is participating actively?
Yeah, there are many levels in this. And an immediate thing to solve the symptom is what some people do is that they put the Post-it note in the online document, and there are all the names of the people, and they each have 3 Post-it notes. So it's quite evident if they're not using their Post-it notes. That's a way of solving the symptom. Another way of solving the symptom could be that instead of coming up with Post-it notes, they all have to bring some data from the latest sprint, any kind of data. A third way of doing it is to use a team radar, where you draw this radar, these spokes, and then you say, for instance, what's the quality of what we do? How much, how happy are we? What is our communication? And then you ask people to vote on these spokes from 0 to 5. So instead of having to write something on a Post-it note, they have to vote. And then because they have to vote, they do vote, right? And then you can have the discussions based on that. Another thing is, but that takes a little bit longer, is to try to figure out why is it that they're not active. Maybe talk to them. Figure out, are they not active because they're shy? Are they not active because they're afraid? Are they not active because they genuinely think everything is wonderful and they don't have anything to say? In those cases, positivity retrospective might work. Or could it be that they think that it's a waste of time? They don't like it because they think that real work is just coding. In those cases, I would use a pattern from a wonderful book by Linda Rising and Marilyn Manns called Fearless Change. And the pattern is called Champion Skeptic. And I've used that myself sometimes when I have somebody who is negative. I don't know whether that's your situation. You need to find out. But if they are negative, you can talk to them one-on-one and say, look, we have these retrospectives. It's part of the process. So it's something that we have to have. And I have to facilitate them and you have to be there. Could we help each other and perhaps make them more valuable, perhaps make them more constructive? Is there a specific theme that you think we should talk about? It could be the testing process. I don't know, it could be the Slack channel communication. It could be communication with the users, or whatever, and try to make them become part of this with you. So a champion skeptic that they can say, well, this is not going to work, this is not going to work, but I think this is going to work. Because if they work with you, they might get more out of it. But it could also be that you just can't get through to them and you just have to ask them to not participate. But then, of course, they don't get a say in what we should change in the team. I hope that sort of answers your questions. That was a lot of answers, I'm sorry. But it just really depends on what the course is.
Hey, hello. Thank you so much for the whole presentation. I have two questions, but probably ask one because we're limited in time. So also about the online retrospective, because they're really popular now, common. And the question is, usually retrospectives have some outcomes like action items, what we're going to do during, like, for example, next sprint. So how to guarantee what to do or to make these action items implemented? For example, maybe reviving action items during like next retro, asking, so, hey, what do you see? What do you think? Etc. Because sometimes it's fine. We discuss, we have a lot of action items, but when we should implement them, like no one's want or all those crazy questions, they just disappeared and say, oh no, now it's fine. Let's keep it as it was actually.
Yeah, it's a very common issue. Not just with online retrospectives, but it seems to be that you get more action items out of the online retrospectives. So one of the things that I do is that I ensure that we have no more than 3 action items, because if we have more than 3 action items, then we won't get it done, because we have a lot of real work when we come back. Now people will say, but all these ideas are good. Why can we only take 3? But you have to say, well, if they're good enough, they'll pop up at the next retrospective. So cut it down to 3, maybe only 1 or 2. Another thing is make sure that it actually are things that the team can do. Going back to that soup exercise, make sure that it's something that they can do, not just influence or something that's in the soup. And then a third thing is to follow up not just at the next retrospective, but perhaps every Wednesday at the stand-up or something like that. Let's look at the retrospective action items. It's also important that there's one person responsible for each action item. Sometimes people are saying, but this is a team thing. Yeah, it's okay, but we have to have somebody who's responsible for reminding the team, perhaps, if it's something that you do every day, or if you do it at the pull requests or whatever. You need one who is responsible, and it shouldn't just be the Scrum Master all the time. And then the last thing I want to say is try to make these action points first-class citizens. It all too often happens that the action points are second-class citizens. And when I say that, I mean that then when you come back after the retrospective, you look at your backlog, you have all these things in the backlog, but all the action items are over here. You don't see them. If you have your backlog here, the action items should be here. If things are estimated here, they should be estimated here. If things are prioritized here, they should be prioritized here. And I think I'm out of time.
Thank you